Hello to everybody joining us. I can see lots of people joining. You're very welcome. We'll make a start in a minute or so. Hello to everybody. I can see lots of messages coming in. You're all very welcome. We're just waiting for a few more people to join and then we will make a start. Okay, I think we'll make a start. Hello everyone and welcome to the first in our series of Big Think webinars for international school leaders, school owners and school groups. We're delighted you've joined us in what we hope will be a useful, informative and inspiring session that is all about thinking big about the future of international education. I'm Susie Williams of the International Schools team at Pearson and I'll introduce you to today's speaker shortly. However, before we get started, I'd just like to draw your attention to the chat and Q&A boxes. If you have any technical queries as we go along, please do pop those into the chat and we'll aim to resolve them for you. And please use the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen, to submit any questions you have on today's topic. I know some of you submitted questions in advance, so thank you for those. There will be time at the end of the webinar for discussion, and we'll aim to get through as many of those questions as we can. Finally, to help us understand a bit more about all of you here today, we have a quick poll which will be appearing on your screens now. In it, we would like you to please quickly tell us what sort of international school or group you're representing here today and what your role is. I'll give you a minute or so to put your answers into the poll. I can see you're voting now, thank you. For those of you just joining us, we've just done a quick introductory poll to find out what sort of international school you are representing here today and what your role is. So if you could fill in the poll on the screen, that would be lovely. I can see the results flooding in. Just give you a few more seconds to keep going. Okay, so it looks like, I'll give you a few more minutes, 58% of you have voted. Okay, polling is closed. So with international schools offering a British curriculum is 48% of you. You're very welcome. And 12% offering a mix of British, IB and or US. And then we've got 29% other. School groups, very welcome. School owners and then principals or heads of school, 26% of you. Vice principals, 20% and 18% other, and members of the teaching team. You're all very welcome here and I hope you enjoy the session. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today's webinar, Mickey Revenaugh. Mickey has been a thought leader at the cutting edge of education, technology and school reform for nearly 30 years. She was a co-founder in 2001 of Connections Education, now Pearson Online and Blended Learning, and Harrow School Online in 2019. She serves as board chair of Brooklyn Laboratory Charter School and vice chair of the board of Innicol. Previously, Mickey was part of the team in 1997 that helped connect every American school to the internet, and she served as education technology and education reform editor at Scholastic. Mickey has a bachelor's degree from Yale, an MBA from New York University Stern School of Business, and an MFA in creative writing. Welcome, Mickey, and over to you.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Susie, and hello to everyone around the world. It's really exciting to see folks as interested as you appear to be in the most exciting topic to me, and hopefully by the time we're done with this, an exciting topic to you as well, which is online learning. So to jump right in, we're going to do yet another poll, but this one is a little bit more about you and your relationship to online learning. So if we could put this next poll up, talking about your experience with online learning, and very conscious that many folks dove into the deep end of the pool in COVID times with a sort of really quick and really intensive experience with online learning. And in fact, I think that's what we're seeing as the poll results are coming in, that, that this was the year that you had your introduction to online learning. And we'll talk about that as we move forward, how to take that experience and build it into a really resilient and durable advantage for your school. Very interesting. I'm glad there are a few true newbies in the audience, and that's great. We'll hopefully have materials that you come away with this that will allow you to build on it. And welcome to the folks who've been involved with online learning for many years. This is, I think, will give you an opportunity to, as they say in the education world, consolidate your learnings and take them forward. Great. So let's talk a little bit first about online learning trends. So wherever you are on the spectrum in terms of your experience and involvement with online learning, you're part of something that's really changing the world of education in a really literal and direct way. All of this got started. Susie mentioned that I was one of the co-founders of Connections Education in the US. And that was a long time ago. It was back at the turn of the 21st century, which it still amazes me that we are able to talk about this as something that we've now been at for more than 20 years. So in that early part of the late 90s into the early part of the 20th century, there was a movement in the US anyway, and I think in other places around the world as well, for state education authorities to provide some online classes as a way to extend and supplement what was available in brick and mortar. But around 2000, a really interesting thing started happening in the United States, which was the emergence of virtual charter schools. So charter schools are essentially what would be called academies in the UK and charters in other places around the world, state-supported schools of choice that families could pick over other kinds of schools. That got combined with the emergence of education technology to create this phenomenon of the virtual charter school, a state-supported school providing a full education that families could choose as an option within the public education system. That really kind of took off and started to multiply across the United States in the early part of the 21st century. And around 2010, we saw the emergence of some international online schools as well. In Connections World, we launched what was then called International Connections Academy, which took that US curriculum offering to the rest of the globe. And many families started from around the world started being interested in online learning as a way to access forms of education that might not have been available to them in their local community, but they knew would be important to their students in terms of their development of global citizenship. Around 2015, we saw the emergence of UK curriculum virtual schools, both in the UK and elsewhere. And then in 2020, COVID happened. And so suddenly what was a niche experience for maybe 1 to 2% of the population around the world became an experience that literally every household had in a really direct way. And every school also had to wrap their arms around almost instantly. The stats, as you lived through them last spring in March and April, were really pretty astonishing, that 9 out of 10 students around the globe were suddenly learning at home, and that's 1.5 billion students. I think what we've heard from talking with schools like yours, and certainly our direct experience as well, is that was a mixed blessing. It was certainly difficult for schools in particular to suddenly take all their best practices and try to do those online. But what they learned, what you learned, and what families learned is actually there's something about this online learning that has some real appeal and real effectiveness that we're all seen people bring into the hopefully soon to be post-COVID era, but an era where schools are going back into face-to-face session, but not quite in the same way that they did before the pandemic. So just as an example of what that impact looked like in the United States, and apologies for that frame of reference, but it has been where I've lived and breathed for the last 15 years or so before I got the incredible gift of being able to focus on international and UK curriculum. But if you flash back to 2002, the first 2 Connections Academy schools launched in the US in 2 states with about 300 students. Connections became part of Pearson in 2011. And if we flash forward to this school year, we went from 300 students in 2002 to over 100,000 full-time students in virtual schools in well over half of the states in the United States, plus 1 global virtual private school serving students from 75 different countries around the world. So this growth curve is really pretty astonishing. The numbers themselves are still relatively small when you count them up across the United States, probably close to 750,000 to 1 million students learning fully online. But we're starting to see literally in every corner of the globe interest in both full-time and supplementary online learning. So not just a US phenomenon, very much becoming a phenomenon of the world. So US curriculum virtual schools, I mentioned before, are starting to internationalize. So those of you that are in schools that offer US curriculum, you probably have already begun thinking about what might you do to offer your really high quality US curriculum school virtually to students around the globe. And I can tell you it's a really worthwhile route to pursue. Our Pearson Online Academy, which is what International Connections Academy is called now, actually went from about 1,000 students at the end of last academic year to 2,500 students at the beginning of this academic year. And about 20% of those are students from around the globe. And we see an incredible growth in students internationally looking for US curriculum online. But we don't stop with US curriculum. We're really proud. I'm really particularly proud to have been part of the launch of Harrow School Online. So partnering with the iconic Harrow School in the UK, a 500-year-old brick and mortar school, to launch a fully virtual version of that serves both girls and boys, we're proud to say, and launched to start serving students around the world this fall. And we'll be building out our UK curriculum offering as well. We're not the only ones. There are plenty of others that are in the field offering this as well, including potentially quite a few in the audience today who are either in the game or looking to get into the game. So for those of you who are focused on the business side of things, what all of this means is it's an incredibly large growing market, rapidly increasing in size, really riding in some ways on the coattails of the growth of international schooling in general, but allowing you to grow much faster, much further beyond the physical footprint of your school and the number of students that you can fit into your building. So 13% compound annual growth rate year over year, to looking to more than 300 million pounds outside the UK. I mean, outside the US. The United States still remains probably the most robust virtual school market today. But if we fast forward a few years, that will no longer be the case. So what's driving all of this, I think, is the same factors that you see driving growth and demand in your schools as they are today. It's this idea of the growing middle class looking for education options and an education experience that state-funded, government-operated schools in many markets just can't possibly offer at the kind of scale and the kind of quality that families are looking for. Global mobility, even though we're all sort of stuck at home and have been for the last 9 months or so, once the pandemic eases, I think this idea of mobility around the globe will reaccelerate in a way that we saw happening before the pandemic. All of us having the ability to work anywhere, to move around the globe and having the education to back that up. We're also seeing and hearing from schools like yours that there are a portion of families that are choosing to opt out of brick and mortar education, even when schools are back fully in session. That could be driven by health concerns on their part, by some just exhaustion about being sort of in school and then out of school as you go in and out of lockdown. In the United States, we're seeing actually more than 30% in some school districts saying, you know what, we want to just keep doing fully remote education. Once families make that leap, what they start looking for is actually built from the ground up virtual education as opposed to what we all had to patch together during the pandemic. So that means all of us who are here today, schools of all kinds, are really forced to innovate and adapt in order to survive. And the good news is there's lots of things to choose from. There's lots of ways to go about infusing online learning into your particular school program. So I want to talk about some of the factors that go into that and some of the decision points that you as a school and a school leadership team or as a school chain will want to make as you think about your path ahead. This defining dimensions of online learning was actually put together way back in the early days of online learning in the US, but the factors themselves actually continue to hold true, which is the dimensions that you'll need to be thinking about in terms of what your offering is. So from supplementary online learning to full-time, a reach that could be fairly local to truly global. Location of the students could be at home, at school, or some combination of the two. We'll talk a bit about synchronous and asynchronous in a minute, but the grade ranges, the level and kind of student to teacher interaction, the level and kind of student to student interaction are all school design elements that are in your hands and in your control to determine based on the ethos and the unique factors that make your school stand out among others. All of those should go into your thinking about your online provision as well. Let's take a couple of those piece by piece. So the question of supplementary versus full-time, which by the way, isn't binary. This is really a continuum. So we often see that schools start with a few, what we might call exotic courses that they may not want to staff up fully to offer, but that they have student demand for, and then gradually start to add more and more online offerings until they have some provision that's full-time online. So content can be used for students to, to engage with from home. It can also be, in classroom or remote, the ability to cycle back and forth between those two. When you get over to the full-time end of the spectrum, you can look at extending your brick and mortar offering into a fully online thing. So you could imagine looking at your waiting list of students and offering them a fully online option to be part of your school community sooner rather than later. Or we are hearing from quite a few schools that are thinking of a brand new, fully online independent offering that's new or part of their overall portfolio. Curriculum choices. It was a thrill to see what the mix of curricula are among the schools that are here today, and all of those same curricula choices are available online as well. Obviously, the US curriculum has been fully built out and is being offered in the US and around the world. Pearson is pushing very hard and fast on the offering of a full UK curriculum, international UK curriculum in particular, with IGCSEs and international A levels available for online delivery. And we're not the only ones, obviously, that are building that out. We just think we do it a little bit better, but it's a critical piece to be able to offer that kind of curriculum online. Local curriculum of various kinds, including in local language. There's nothing about the technology that would stop you from offering, local curriculum requirements, as well as some local languages that you may need to have online. And then International Baccalaureate, which, over the past decade or so has dipped its toe in and out of online learning. We know that the IB schools in the mix here today are questing for a way to have a really robust online offering that fulfills the vision and mission of International Baccalaureate and does it in a way that allows the reach to be much greater. We're really excited to see that happen and very much in support of that as well. So the modes of engagement, this is where I end up spending the most time talking with schools about what it is that they want to offer. I think it's safe to say that in March, when suddenly everybody had to go remote instantly, the first thing most folks did was take their great teachers, put them on a camera, and do lots of Zoom courses where it was essentially chalk and talk, but via the technology. So synchronous instruction where the teacher and students are together in real time in a webinar, pretty much like what we're doing now, is absolutely a critical piece of an online offering. What we see sometimes though is that schools stop there rather than thinking about what the full mix could be and how the technology could really serve different kinds of learning in a way that's a little closer to the creative approaches that you're seeing in your regular classrooms. And that's where this asynchronous, a really wonky word, but what that really means is the content that students interact with directly. In some UK school settings, that's called self-study. I tend to push back on that term because it makes it sound like the kids are out there completely on their own. And in a well-designed asynchronous offering, you're building in instructional intelligence into the content with lots of formative assessments and checks for understanding and places where data can flow to really help teachers tailor their synchronous instruction for the needs of their students. So combining those things together, adjusting the balance of those mix is something that as a school design choice, you'll want to pay close attention to, and don't stop short by just thinking that teachers talking on camera are the ultimate in online learning, because that may not actually address the highest value that your teachers can bring, which is partly as presenters of content and experts in their field, but also really experts in bringing out the best in every student, personalized learning for students, and being able to interact with students in one-on-one or in small groups. Modes of delivery is another decision that you'll want to be looking at. So fully online, where the students are not coming into a physical location in an organized way, or at least organized by the school, is certainly a mode that's available. That's the one that I've probably spent most of my career in. And I love to get into arm wrestling matches with people about, what you can really do in a fully online setting in terms of students' pastoral care, in terms of extracurricular activities, in terms of peer-to-peer engagement. I believe have seen with my own eyes that you can do that really robustly, fully online. At the same time, if you have a brick and mortar setting, if you have a network of schools, if you have places where students can gather, you can look at doing a blended or hybrid mix that takes sort of the best of online with the things that happen really robustly face-to-face, and do something that's a really intentionally well thought out blend. And we're seeing lots of exciting examples of that, particularly in the international school world and particularly among school chains. So let's talk a little bit about designing an online program. And I'm going to give you a warning that you're going to have a little bit of work to do in a few minutes. The elements that I'm talking about here, I'm going to ask you to think about for a couple minutes, have your own big think, and imagine your own online program that you design from scratch. So consider that a warning. And here's a few tools that you'll want to use to think about. One is to think about the kinds of learning models when you bring all of those approaches together, all those school design choices together, what that might look like. So in the Connections Academy model, we build everything around what we call a learning triad. The students in the middle, we have about 75% asynchronous, about 25% synchronous instruction, that personalization through data, really critical, and then new staffing models that include some paid positions that we might call a success coach or a learning coach, that are working with students in a pastoral care, planning for your future kind of way, in addition to really great academic experts and really great academic content. So that's one learning model that we've seen emerging. Here's just a couple of other examples to provide grist for your mill as you start to think about your own. So we've seen some really nice examples of fully synchronous primary schools, with the idea that having that live teacher engagement for younger learners is really important, but that it's not all, obviously, hopefully not all as you design it, teachers talking and students passively listening, but really engaging, working on projects together, doing presentations of their own to really bring out the best of their learning. Sort of on the other end of the spectrum, you can imagine a blended sixth form where students are coming into a school building on a regular basis, socializing, getting ready for their exams, but having a good chunk of their instruction be online. It could be online in the blended setting. It could be online at home. It could be online as a combination of the two. And then we're starting to see in the emergence of what a really exciting kind of school that I'm seeing around the globe, which is specialty schools that take advantage of the fact that you can do some really cool things online, and that the community of learners and of interest for some specialties might be distributed around the globe. So for example, coding specialty schools that provide all the basic curriculum, but have a sort of special focus on computer science and coding, and building that into a regular part of the student's school day. You can imagine similar kinds of specialty schools around the performing arts, around the humanities, around STEM. There's all kinds of options that you can look at, building sort of that top spin of special focus on top of a really solid foundation of online. So here is your assignment. You have 2 minutes to do your own big think. Turn off your other pinging notifications that you have going in the background, and take 2 minutes to imagine your own online program. Imagine you're starting with a blank slate. You're creating from scratch a program of your own. Think for 2 minutes, we'll time you, and then we'll ask after 2 minutes to describe in the chat pod in 10 words or less, ideally, what the vision of your school is. So Susie, I'm going to ask you to help me keep time here a little bit, and we will say on your mark, get set, go. 2 minutes. Consider this your 1 minute warning.
It's about 30 seconds.
Great, we're starting to see reports out coming in. Our overachievers are already describing their visions in the chat pod. Not to be competitive or anything, but jump on in there.
Okay, last 10 seconds. And that's your time.
Brilliant. So in the chat pod, we're seeing really exciting opportunities, a lot of focus on hybrid, which does not surprise me. People who are really proud and passionate about their bricks and mortar implementations understand that there's a really important role that can play in delivery. I'm seeing speakers and actors being part of the overall implementation. Let me see, what was our very first one that came in? Oh, this is great. You guys are doing fantastic. School that can develop creative and critical thinkers. That would be fantastic. School vision, cater to the digital literacy, obviously really critical. You see if there's anything else that jumps out as being colorful and mostly interactive. Hopefully that is true no matter what we do, right? Individual, one-on-one, and small group. I think that's really important. We're seeing really interesting work around tutorial sessions, one-on-one sessions, office hours that teachers put together, and so on. Strictly virtual, thank you so much. Recess time administered with coding, interesting, that's excellent. Blended, let's see if we have anything else that's jumping out. Hybrid. I think we're going to see some amazing hybrid schools evolving. Excellent. All right, well, keep putting your answers into the chat pod. We will have a chance to look at all of those, and if there's ways that we can help you fulfill your vision, hopefully as we wrap up, you'll see that we can be creating a community of new online and blended schools around the globe, where we're all competing with each other at some level, but also cooperating with each other to make this a really great field. So just as a kind of a little bit of a parting shot, I want to talk about the necessary elements, whether you're doing a hybrid, fully virtual, or something else that you'll want to line up, a little bit of a shopping list for what it is that you'll want to do to build out your online program. So you'll need curriculum content. Certainly that has been the thing that in a traditional school setting, you're using resources, textbooks, and other things, and your teachers are often creating their lesson plans for their particular students. As you go further into online learning, you may discover that actually having a set of online content that's universally used across your school frees your teachers up to do really what they are uniquely qualified to do, which is individualized and personalized for students. Having great curriculum content allows you to do that. A learning management system, and there are a dime a dozen these days. You'll want one that allows you to do everything you want to do online and hybrid, including tracking data in a really robust way. Synchronous tools, which could be anything from Zoom to Adobe Connect to Teams, we hear a lot of schools using. Having a tool that allows you to do what we're doing here today is really important. Professional development, I think we can't overestimate how critical that is. Great teachers are great teachers no matter what, but great teachers need some extra tools in their toolkit to be able to teach effectively online. And that's partly communication, it's partly use of data, it's partly making sure to build up those eyes that teachers supposedly have in the back of their head. You kind of need to have them all over your head in an online learning setting, so you're paying attention to students through a bunch of different media that they're interacting with you. Student recruitment and marketing, you're used to recruiting students for your brick and mortar schools. If you start expanding your footprint out, you're going to need to look at some additional recruitment methods and ways of tracking and bringing students into your school. And then wraparound services, which include everything from extracurricular activities to pastoral care, special education services, and so on. All the things that are part of your brick and mortar school offering, you'll need to offer online as well. And the good news is that there's quite a bit of installed wisdom around how to do that, and some really new ideas that are emerging as well. So consider this your shopping list for what it is that you want to do to go online. So then I think we have one last poll before we wrap up and go to Q&A. So this is just thinking about what you've learned today and what you came to this webinar with, what your next step is likely to be in terms of online learning. And feel free, if you really are still not convinced, to let us know that. I suspect if you're here today and you've lived through the March, April COVID experience, you really want to use that and build it out as part of what it is that you're offering. Excellent. Really excited to see the ambition of schools to really make online and blended part of the core school offering. I think one of the things that we're hearing from schools is that families are starting to demand that. And then there are new families that you could access as part of your school population that would be looking to have at least part of their provision online. Having that and being able to tap into that will be really exciting and allow you to continue growing and thriving into 2021, which, knock on wood for all of us, will be a much better year than 2020, and really will be, I think, the first year of the rest of our online learning lives as we work together to make this a really strong and robust and rich kind of provision for students that we serve. And with that, we'll open up for questions. Please put your questions in either the Q&A or chat pod. The amazing Susie Williams is capturing those questions and will pitch them to me, and we'll answer as many as we can in the next 5 to 7 minutes or so.
Thanks, Mickey. I will start you off with a question from Vinita Shenoy, who's principal of Gateway College in Colombo, who asks, Can the concept of integrated learning or theme-based learning help reduce the load or quantity of curriculum, but increase critical thinking as well as broad-based learning? And there's an example here. So for example, the topic on pyramids will be taught in history, math, geography, and English.
I love the way you think. I think we've seen that kind of really innovative work on instructional delivery and content delivery in brick and mortar school, and it can absolutely be transferred online. In some ways, depending on how you've constructed your content and curriculum, it might be much easier to deliver online because you have the capability of assigning students to what we would call learning objects in the industry, bits of content that they're integrating and interacting with, pulled together thematically for the kind of exploration that you're talking about. And the really exciting thing that we see happening is as we give students the time and space to delve into those topics of interest, outside of what would be normally the normal class period. So not trying to go deep in 40 minutes, but giving them the time and space to do that on their own time, away from the demands of the synchronous setting, and then coming back together synchronously to present, to argue, to debate, to discuss. I think lends itself really well to the kind of integrated thematic learning that you're talking about. I would love to see all of our schools do more of that, whether they're brick and mortar or online. The online system will allow you to do that, I think, really effectively.
Thanks, Nikki. That's great. A question from Robert Uko. What are some of the considerations in designing an online curriculum?
The key thing is to design with the kinds of data that you want built in from the get-go. So often what happens when we're working with traditional print curriculum is that we have to be thinking about how do we assess whether our students are understanding and mastering this material through a combination of quizzes and worksheets, but also observation of your students in their classroom. The ideal online content builds that in so that as students are working through their facilitated self-study, their asynchronous content, the system is gathering lots of data about what they're explicitly understanding, how they're answering, checks for understanding kind of questions, but also what their behavior in the platform is telling you. How long are they spending on a particular question? Do they tend to quickly skip over things and then need to go back? All of that data is like gold for teachers who can then use that to adjust their synchronous instruction in a way that they're bringing out the absolute best in every student. So really designing with that end in mind. It's not an easy lift. That's why there are organizations like Pearson that spend a lot of time, money, and talent to try to build this out really well. But we've seen folks create this on their own at the school side as well, if they know what it is that they're trying to gather.
Thank you. Another question here, how about data safety? It's a big issue for us in our region.
Big issue for everyone. And I think a growing understanding across the globe that it's an imperative that we keep students' data safe, that we allow students to sort of be in control of their own data, including having their data leave our systems when they leave us, so that we're not maintaining information about them that we shouldn't have. So one of the things that you look for in your learning management system is data security, that it meets all the standard requirements, but then goes beyond that. You'll want to be really careful about permissioned access to data. So within your school, not every teacher needs to see how every student is doing in every class. Not every one of your staff members needs to have access to all of the log notes about special education needs. You can set up your permission structure so that all of that data is protected. Make sure you have all the usual things you want to have in place in terms of failover and protection against attacks from outside. But we've seen over increasing scale that you can do that really effectively and be able to say to parents and to students that we're keeping track of their data and keeping it protected in a way that fulfills our obligations to them.
Thank you. We've got another question which I think is asking about the flexibility of online schooling in comparison to print book teaching. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Mickey?
So I think there's two dimensions of flexibility that are really critical. One is just the possibly somewhat obvious but maybe not flexibility of time and space, right? So in a traditional setting where we're dependent on print and face-to-face, what happens in that 45, 50, 60-minute class session is pretty limited, and then everything else becomes homework, right? And homework, there's a limit on how much homework we can ask students to do. In a well-designed online setting, homework is really kind of integrated in with the overall curriculum offering. So students can take as long as they need to do that or move through it as quickly as they can without having to wait for the rest of the class. Then there's the flexibility of mixing, mashing, and recombining. So if you've set up your curriculum in a fairly modular way, it allows teachers to move around the order of things. It allows a school to group things together thematically, as the question earlier was focusing on. It really allows things to be updated on the fly. So when a country changes its name or something happens in the world, your content and curriculum can be updated instantly. So your students always have access to the most current information. It's obviously huge, which is why I think we're seeing, the print world generally sort of move towards more digital delivery. And then the next step beyond that is online.
Okay, there's a really interesting question here just come through. Will online learning create very knowledgeable and curious students, but ones who would find it difficult to interact with others in society?
Well, that is one of my favorite questions, because I think what we are seeing actually in real life is that the skills students get from interacting with each other online, particularly with people who are different from them. So one of the really exciting secrets about online school is it allows you to be peers with students who don't live where you live, whose culture may be different from your culture, whose socioeconomic background may be different from yours. You're engaging and interacting with them as peers in a classroom. That builds a set of sort of cultural competencies, I think, that are really, really critical. The other thing that we have really seen is that for today's students, they don't draw such a fine distinction between their friends online and their friends face-to-face. They're all their friends. And when you get a chance to interact with those same friends face-to-face, it's as if you have known them all your life. And you take those same cultural competencies, those same listening skills, those same ability to interact into the face-to-face world. I think it's also fair to say that for all of us, our future as workers, as citizens, will also be at least partly online. I think the shift to online working is not a trend that's going to reverse itself anytime soon. So the students that are learning to be really effective learners in online schools, I can guarantee you will be really effective learners in university, where a good and growing portion of their instruction will be online, and will be incredibly effective workers in the workplaces of the future, which may look a little bit like where we are today. So I'm bullish about this, and I think it adds to students' skills and capabilities for being very effective citizens in the world rather than detract from them.
Thanks, Mickey. Another good question here. Which teaching method is better, synchronous or asynchronous?
Oh, it's like asking which of your children you love more, right? They have strengths that really complement each other. So I think our natural tendency as educators is to assume that synchronous is always better. And there certainly are techniques of synchronous instruction that allow teachers to be in very intimate connection with students in the most positive way. Your students feel like they're literally there with you. They feel like they're literally there with their peers in a well-constructed synchronous session. And it gives you an opportunity to react in real time. The asynchronous piece speaks to the flexibility of online learning. So the ability to learn at your own pace, to go back and review material and then review it again. The ability to move faster, to follow your interests. If you want to do all of your maths on Monday and do all of your English on Tuesday, your school design will probably allow you to do that as a learner, to construct the world that makes most sense to you. So I think you absolutely don't want one without the other. And what I'm really encouraging a lot of traditional educators who are moving into the online world is to be really intentional and thoughtful about what you're using that synchronous instruction for. It should not be used to deliver content if you can help it, because that doesn't then use the full value of what the synchronous session can do, which is allow you to interact and engage with your students in a way that goes potentially a little bit beyond what you were able to do in your face-to-face classroom.
Thanks, Mickey. We've just got 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask you one final question before we move to the last slide. And this question is, as a science teacher, can you implement a virtual laboratory to show off experiments that are needed online?
Another one of my very favorite questions. So I'll tell a little bit of story about back in the olden days, around the turn of the 21st century in the US. There was a movement to bring advanced placement courses online. Advanced placement is probably the closest that the US curriculum has to A levels in terms of the depth and rigor. It includes all the sciences. And there was a big debate about whether you could really do advanced placement biology online, for example. And what we discovered is that actually real scientists in the world spend as much of their time doing online simulation, working with gigantic data sets, and collaborating across the world as they do in a physical lab. And so we tried to bring that spirit of simulation and experimentation online through really great online simulations, virtual reality, and so on. And then we found that there's actually some real utility in filming students and teachers in a physical lab doing the kinds of things that a student would do in a regular lab, to just really see what the procedures are for mixing chemicals, dissecting the frog, whatever it might be. We believe that the combination of simulation and really great video, along with really great teaching that's focused on the conceptual piece of that, actually make great science learners. And the good news is that, at least in the international A levels and international GCSE, the practicals, as they're called, are really tested in a written format, as opposed to someone having to literally demonstrate, that physics experiment hands-on. So the online learning setting actually prepares students very well for the examination. And we really believe and have evidence to show that they're conceptually where they absolutely need to be as students who are studying STEM subjects.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mickey. Thank you to everybody who has put questions into the chat. There are a good 20 odd in there. We'll work out a way of answering those for you. It may be a blog post on our International Schools blog. I'll talk to Mickey afterwards and hopefully twist her arm to answer.
We'll get it done. We'll get it done.
So I'd just like to say thank you, Mickey, and to everybody who has joined us here today. Certificates of attendance and a link to the recording of this webinar will be sent to you by email. And I'll just give a very quick plug for the second webinar in the Big Think series, which takes place on Tuesday, the 19th of January. This time, the topic will be vocational education. Is it time to invite Cinderella to the International School Ball? And registration is now open on the Big Think webpage. I do hope you can join us for that webinar too. Thank you again, and have a good break at the end of the year when it comes around. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Wonderful to see you. Bye.
Thank you.